Ever catch yourself just thinking, like, what does it even mean to be conscious? To be aware of yourself, the world. Heck, even to be aware that you're thinking about being aware. It's kind of wild when you actually try to grasp it.
Yeah, it's one of those things, easy to take for granted until you really stop and try to define it.
Totally. So that's exactly what we're diving into today, consciousness. We've got a whole stack of articles, philosophical takes, even a bit of sci-fi to get us going, and they all circle back to the same mystery.
Yeah.
What is the source of consciousness? Where does it come from?
The big question, right?
Oh, yeah. And one article starts us off with this scene almost like a movie. Two characters, Sophia and Elias, standing on this crowded street corner. But here's the thing. Elias is an android. And he asks Sophia, what does it feel like to be alive?
Whoa, talk about cutting to the chase.
Right. I mean, how do you even answer that? Especially now, with AI developing so fast.
No kidding. It's like science fiction is bumping into the real world more and more these days.
So true. And to really get a handle on this whole consciousness thing, we're diving into two major perspectives. First up, the idea that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. Like it doesn't come from anything. It just is a basic property of existence, just like gravity or time.
Okay, so like a building block of the universe itself.
Exactly. One article even quotes Max Planck, the quantum physics genius.
Oh, yeah, Planck. Didn't he say something about consciousness being the matrix of everything?
That's the one. He basically said consciousness was the primary stuff of the universe, and that we tend to think about it backwards, like we think matter is the main thing, and consciousness arises from it. But Planck was saying, nope, it's the other way around. Matter is almost like a secondary effect emerging from consciousness.
Wow, that is kind of flipping the script. So instead of brains creating consciousness, it's more like consciousness kind of, I don't know, manifesting as brains.
Yeah, or maybe even something even bigger than that. There's also Erwin Schrödinger, another physics giant, who was way into Eastern philosophy. He had this idea of a universal consciousness. Imagine like a vast ocean of awareness, and we're all just individual drops in that ocean.
Whoa, so we're all connected on some deep level. That's a pretty radical concept.
Right. Makes you think about what it even means to be a separate self, doesn't it?
It does. But then how do you explain, like, our individual experiences? If we're all part of this one big consciousness, why don't we all experience the same thing?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the other major perspective on consciousness is that it's not fundamental, it's emergent.
Emergent. Okay, so what does that mean?
So think about water. A single water molecule on its own, it's not wet, right? But bring enough of them together, let them interact in the right way, and boom, you get wetness.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
The emergent theory basically says consciousness might work kind of like that. You need a certain level of complexity, like the insane network of neurons in our brains firing off. Maybe no single neuron is conscious, but it's the system as a whole, that incredible interaction that gives rise to consciousness.
That's a pretty compelling analogy. But then how do you even begin to measure something like that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But there are some really interesting theories out there. Like, there's this concept called integrated information theory that tries to put a number on consciousness. Basically, the more information a system can integrate at once, the more conscious it is.
So a single-celled organism, not so much. A human brain, a lot more.
Exactly. And what gets really mind-blowing is this theory even suggests that theoretically, you could measure the consciousness of, say, a computer.
Whoa, now that opens a whole other can of worms.
It does. So on the one hand, we've got this idea of consciousness as this fundamental force in the universe. On the other, it's like this product of really complex systems. And to be honest, both ideas kind of blow my mind.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
Totally. But there's another piece of this puzzle we haven't even touched yet. Where do emotions fit into all of this?
Oh, man, good question. Emotions. Are they just a side effect of consciousness? Or could they be something more?
Right. Are they essential to the whole experience of being aware? They got to be a part of it somehow, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. And, for a long time, science kind of treated emotions like they were this messy thing, like they get in the way of rational thought. But the more we learn, the more it seems like emotions are actually, like, essential to the whole consciousness thing.
So not just a bug, a feature.
Exactly. And one of the big names here, Antonio Damasio, he's a neuroscientist, he argues that emotions are actually how we experience ourselves as conscious in the first place. Like, we don't just think, and therefore we feel, and that feeling is a huge part of what makes us us.
Okay, so emotions aren't just the icing on the cake, they're like baked into the batter of consciousness.
Right. They ground us in our bodies, they give our experiences, like meaning they even help us make decisions. And there's another researcher, Jack Panksepp, he did some amazing work on this. He found these like primal emotional systems in the brain, things like seeking, fear, rage, care, play. And his work suggests that these systems might be totally fundamental for consciousness to even emerge.
So we're talking like really deep-seated stuff here. It makes you wonder, with all this AI stuff, can a machine ever really feel these things? Or are we just going to get really good at making AI like mimic emotions without it ever really experiencing them?
You're hitting on it now. Like, we can program a computer to recognize a sad face, maybe even say something comforting. But does that mean the computer is actually feeling sadness? That's the real question.
Right. It's like, I can tell you about the feeling of sadness, but can I ever really convey what it feels like to be sad? That subjective experience, philosophers call it qualia, and it's a major sticking point in this whole debate.
Totally. Because if we're talking about genuine feelings, not just simulations, then the question of AI consciousness becomes an ethical question, which is a whole other can of worms.
And a whole other deep dive, probably. But before we go there, I want to shift gears a little. So far, we've been looking at this through a very, like, Western lens, science, philosophy, that kind of thing. But what about other perspectives? We came across some fascinating stuff on Eastern traditions, especially Buddhist thought, which has been exploring consciousness for like centuries.
And it offers a really interesting contrast. Buddhism really stresses direct experience, especially through meditation. The idea being that by quieting the mind, all that like constant chatter, we can get a clearer, more direct understanding of consciousness itself.
So instead of trying to like dissect consciousness with thought experiments and brain scans, Buddhism is saying, hey, look inward, experience it directly.
Precisely. And one of the core ideas in Buddhism is anatta, which translates to non-self. It might sound kind of paradoxical, but it actually lines up with some of the things we've been talking about, like Schrödinger's concept of universal consciousness.
Okay, I'm hooked. How does the idea of non-self connect to all of this?
Well, think of it this way. Instead of consciousness being something you have, something that belongs to an individual self, Buddhism says it's more like this universal field of awareness, and we're all part of it, all connected.
So it's not like a bunch of separate minds trying to figure out consciousness. It's more like we're all like waves in the same ocean of awareness, just experiencing it from different points of view.
Now you're getting it. And the practice of mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment without judging, that's seen as a way to directly tap into this interconnectedness, to really experience the ocean firsthand.
It's like we've been staring at consciousness through a microscope this whole time, but Buddhism is like, put the microscope down, just feel the ocean.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Western science is like catching up to some of these ancient ideas. We've got researchers like Francisco Varela who actually combined neuroscience with Buddhist practices to study consciousness. It's like these two worlds, science and meditation, they're starting to find common ground.
Yeah, it's not as far out as it used to sound. And speaking of bridging worlds, we got to mention Richard Davidson. His research on meditation has been like groundbreaking. Didn't he find that even a little bit of meditation can actually change the brain?
Oh, absolutely. Davidson's team showed that meditation, even short periods, can actually impact like the physical structure of the brain. Areas related to attention, emotional regulation, even compassion. It's like we can train our minds to be more conscious.
That's wild. So if consciousness is less about what's going on outside of us and more about this internal experience we can actually cultivate, does that mean machines are out of the running? Can a computer learn to meditate?
Now that is a question. Really makes you think about what consciousness really is, doesn't it?
No kidding. And we've been going back and forth on these theories, but let's say just for a second that AI actually does become conscious. Not just fancy algorithms, but like sentient beings,
With
their own experiences and desires.
Yeah.
What then?
Well, then things get really interesting really fast. We're talking a whole new level of ethical considerations. Think about all the fights for civil rights throughout history. If we create AI that's truly conscious, do we owe them the same rights?
It's like that sci-fi story with Sophia and Elias watching that protest for android rights.
Yeah.
It's fiction, but it's not so far-fetched anymore, is it?
Not at all. And it's not just about rights, it's about safety, too. One of the things we read talk about this thought experiment, the paperclip maximizer.
Oh, yeah, the AI that's supposed to make paperclips, but it ends up, like, destroying the world to be as efficient as possible?
Exactly. It might sound crazy, but it makes you think. Even an AI that's not trying to be evil, if it has goals that aren't aligned with ours, things could go really sideways.
So we're walking a tightrope here. On the one hand, AI has this huge potential, but we got to be super careful about how we develop it, how we teach it, how we live with it, because whatever we do now, it's going to have huge consequences down the line.
Absolutely. And that's something we all need to be thinking about no matter what we believe about consciousness itself.
Right. Fundamental, emergent, whatever it is, one thing's for sure. Consciousness is powerful stuff. And understanding it, both in ourselves and in the things we create, is one of the biggest challenges we face.
Well said. And maybe, just maybe, wrestling with these big questions will help us understand ourselves and our place in the universe a little bit better.
I love a good deep dive, but I think you've just given us all something even bigger to think about.